It's August 1st, 2023. We're at Goldfinger. You're listening to the Beer Temple Podcast.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, seen from again.
Hello and welcome to the Beer Temple Podcast on location. Downers Grove, Goldfinger Brewing. Here we are for the one of the lead-up events to the third Lagerversary at Goldfinger. And we're here with, my co-host, Mike Shalal.
How's it going?
I'm Chris Quinn. I'm also a co-host of this show. We're here with the Fade Master, also on locale. He apparently had to travel 6 whole minutes to get here. Not a lot of people know.
You're doxing the
that
Fade Master.
The Fade Master. Fade Master resides.
People are going to get on
in
Google
Downers
Maps
Grove.
and try to find his house now.
That's true.
Streisand effect is about to happen to the Fade Master.
Right. All these people who want to worship the Fade.
Both of them.
He had his work cut out for him today. There was a lot of live fading that was needed.
Live fading, setting up, curveballs. Should we talk about what we did? And then
And we should also introduce who's sitting next to you.
Of course. It's Tom from Goldfinger.
Hey, guys.
What's up, man? Thanks for having us out.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah?
Great to have you guys out here.
Great. Yeah, well, it's great to be, honestly, anywhere.
Yeah.
But especially
it's
here.
great to be.
Yeah, it's very Chauncey Jardinera of us.
Being here. So we just recorded a recorded version of something that you kind of do from time to time, Tom, which is to record or just to do a little panel or a little talk rather after you tap a cask of one of your lagers, right?
Yeah. It's the first Tuesday of the month. So that means that we pull off a cask of young lager, tap it on the bar, and just talk with the customers about what's interesting about the beer at that state versus its finished state. So over the last year, we've had a bunch of different brewers, your co-host included, come and do the honors of actually tapping the cask. He did an excellent job, by the way.
Thank you.
If this podcast doesn't work out, you definitely have a future in cask
Professional
tapping.
cask
More
tapper.
importantly, I want some Juicy G, who did a terrible job.
Oh, yeah, let's go. Who did not live up to their potential, I guess.
Yeah.
Who was it?
It'd be great if it was like Dan Carey came in one time, lost the whole cast,
Full leader hose and
had
and he
no
just
idea what was
knocked the
going
cask
on,
out.
just didn't know what he was doing. Like didn't try to put the mallet into the cask and hit it with the tap. Didn't know what he was doing.
He's gonna give me. Can I swear?
Yes.
Shit. But the most awkward tapping was Eric Flores from Whiskey Hill, because he had the he had the faucet. He was a panelist. He had the faucet in his left hand, and he took the mallet and was like trying to like hit the faucet.
So
right,
you're
under his elbow.
going overhand.
He was going overhand with the faucet.
Not the way to do it.
Trying to, it was so awkward. It's pretty
not the way to do
terrible.
it. You gotta go.
But it got in eventually. And
You do kind of have to. You gotta. I mean, you can go overhand.
Yep.
He just didn't have the tech.
Also, the funniest one was Jude. He was the first one, Jude from Hot Butcher, to tap the cask. And the way it came about was I had been tapping it. Jeremy, my brewer, had been tapping it. My wife tapped it too. And eventually we were like, hey, let's bring some friends here. And I was on the phone with Jude that day. And I was like, hey, if you're around, you want to tap this cask? He's like, yeah, man, for sure. It's like, do you know how to do it?
No to anything.
Do you know how to do it? And he's like,
Except
oh, yeah,
negativity.
man, I've done it probably 5 or 6 times. I was like, oh, sweet. This is going to work out great. We finally get to behind the bar. Cask is up. It's a popular one because it was some seasonal beer or something like that. A lot of people there. And he turns to me. He's like, I've never done this before.
Classic teenage boy.
Nice. I don't think I've ever done a gravity feed like the classic ones that you've ever seen. I've done plenty of the hand pull cask.
Sure.
I've tapped a bunch of them, but never the gravity feed.
Have
I
you
don't
ever?
think.
Do you have any non-brewers tap casks?
We have, I mean, my wife did one. And she
I
was
think we're gonna have to get Chris up in this.
Oh no.
She's a co-brewery owner though. She's
I don't
Right.
want to. No, I'm.
Oh, I would
fine.
love that.
I've done
No,
it
I
enough.
think we should.
If you've never done it, we're
Yeah.
having you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
Can I tap it with a lucre? Can I have it?
Now we're talking. Now we're
But
talking.
then only if you put a lucre at Beer Temple.
Right. Yeah.
That's
I want
the
to do a
trade-off.
gravity pour where I'm literally hammering,
Hammering a
a
lucre
lucre into it, and then doing Milko.
Well, I'm excited but also nervous because we have a pallet of German, like, real gravity kegs coming.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
the wooden
that's awesome.
ones that are
yeah.
vertical.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many of
And-
those are on a pallet?
8 of them.
That's awesome.
We have to have one of those at the Beer Temple. Then that'd be an amazing event. That'd be a lot of fun.
Well, why don't you come out here and
the-
tap the first one of those, and then you go to the Beer Temple and tap the first
Sounds
one at the Beer
good.
Temple.
There you go.
the Holzfass.
Look
but
at you.
I'm a little nervous too because I've never done one that way. I got the big wooden round mallet to knock it
Yeah.
in too, and those are way messier than the English style firkin.
Let's go.
Okay. We did actually. What are the little like pitch lined ones that you can get? Like
the party keg kind
Yeah.
of thing that looks like it.
You're
but
right. Those can be a little tricky.
They can be a little
as
tricky.
well.
Yep.
Yeah, those can be tricky.
This German engineering has to be very precise unless it
Unless it
goes
isn't.
awry.
Right.
Totally.
So, yeah, I'm sorry.
With this English style firkin,
Yeah.
we usually burp the top first.
Oh, you're
So
nerfing
the-
it for us.
So the pressure isn't crazy. So when you knock that faucet
Yeah.
in, it's just a little splash.
You got to soft spile it for a little bit beforehand.
Soft spile, exactly. So
It's
when
that
I was
mild in
talking,
you coming out.
when I was talking with the German guy about how to work this thing, I was like, "So what tool do I need to like burp it first?" He's like, "Why would you ever burp it and lose the CO2? No,
And then
you
he's
just
like, hold
hit
on.
the mallet."
I gotta go to my gig on sprockets real quick.
Right. Well, it has to be something because it has to be able to pour. Like, it won't pour unless...
There's a key, but he's like, "You put that after you put the."
I mean, if there's
faucet
enough
in."
head pressure in it, then you don't need something. You'll just
Sure.
push
I mean,
right
you
out
don't
of that.
need anything, I guess, ever, but it might just get messy.
No one needs anything. We're all rocks and islands.
Right. Anyway, we're out here in Downers Grove.
We're out here. It's your
We're out
boys.
here. It's your boys,
Eric.
Mike, Chris, and Tom, and Serge, and we just completed a panel,
Yep.
and
Just want to let you know we're gonna have a little bit of a different show today. It's gonna be fun.
and also keep those emails coming. We still need to do. Did we ever do an email show? Yeah, we did one.
We owe a lot of people a lot of T-shirts.
Yeah, we
That's the
do.
thing. So stop sending us emails until we get backed up on the T-shirts.
Don't stop doing that. So thanks to everyone who has, and keep it up, and
we love
enjoy the show, and we'll talk to you next week. That's it. See you. All right, we're here on location for the Beer Temple podcast. We're at Goldfinger. Thank you so much to Tom, proprietor extraordinaire, lucre lover, lager expert, for having us here for a very special event. I'm also here with Mike. So why don't you say hi, Mike?
Hi.
So for the listeners of the podcast, I'm going to get through it very quickly. Expect 0% inside jokes because we have a group audience here who won't know what's going on. But we're here for a very special cask beer tapping for the lagerversary, the third lagerversary of Goldfinger. And Tom has put together a panel, and we're going to talk about the beer that we have here in cask, and we're talking about cask beer, cask lager.
Mostly mild ale, right?
We'll get that. They don't know that I'm going to hijack it and talk about English mild, but No, it's okay. And we're just going to talk about lagers and cask lager. So I want to first thank everybody for coming on. And why don't we go right down the line and introduce yourselves? Why don't you start first, Mike?
I'm Mike Shalau from Was Brewing and the Beer Temple podcast.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Eric from Whiskey Hill Brewing.
Hi, I'm Lincoln Slagle from Emancipation Brewing Company.
I'm Tom Beckman from this brewery.
Never heard of that one.
My name is Jude LaRose from Hot Butcher for the World out of Chicago, Illinois, and Bedford Park, Illinois.
Brian Pavola from Pollyanna Brewing and Distilling.
Mike Tharp from Afterthought Brewing.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, for introducing yourself. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having our podcast record the panel. Tom, so this is something you do every first Tuesday, right? Do you want to tell everyone, on the podcast and here, what the idea is behind tapping casks of lager on every first Tuesday?
Sure. First, I wanted to point out that everybody sitting on this panel has previously tapped a cask on one of our past first Tuesdays. So we'll be voting on who did the best tapping at the end. No, we started doing this because we kept getting questions about, first, why are our tanks horizontal? And once we explain kind of the advantage of using horizontal tanks in lager production, with that also comes the discussion about time. And anytime we started talking about time and how long it takes us to turn around a beer, people wondered why. So we figured, why not give our customers unprecedented access to what us as brewers get to try essentially on a weekly basis, which is the developing beer, seeing where it's going, determining when the beer is going to be ready. Because most often, and maybe not for everybody, but definitely from a brewer's perspective, there's some potential harshness in some of the beer throughout the process, but it's understandable, and it's actually pleasant when you call it out and you discuss it. So as part of the first Tuesday cask tapping, it wasn't just try this really young kind of raw beer. It was, let's talk about it. What flavor notes are you getting? What's different about this version versus the finished version that you've tried previously? And we've been doing it, I think, for about a year now.
And well, thank you. And so, what should people be looking for in this in the cask beer? You said it's not necessarily raw, but it isn't completely finished. I think it tastes really nice. And I also want to just mention to the other panelists, Jude, and I think you know this as a longtime guest, and so do you, Tom. Don't wait to be asked. Just pick up the mic and ask. If you have a question for another panelist, go for it and ask your question. And if there's something that anybody is picking up in their cask beer or that they especially like or enjoy about this cask beer in particular or about them in general, let us know and speak up, because we were joking about English mild before, but there's a difference between this and English mild, because that is the finished state of that beer, and this is kind of a work in progress here, right? So this isn't meant to be necessarily a replacement for the original, right?
That's correct. One of the common themes with all the casks are two major things. First and foremost, it won't be as clear as you're used to seeing the finished version, and that's because the yeast is still in suspension, so it's still doing its magic. It's softening the beer, it's melding flavors, melding different compounds in the beer over time. The other thing is, especially in the case of this cask, since it's fairly early on in the process, we do naturally carbonate all our beers, but it hasn't had enough time in a really cold state for all that natural carbonation to actually solubilize into the beer yet. So you would also feel potentially a softer, slightly less carbonated beer, and then everything that comes along with it. But I'd be interested to hear the panelists' take on the differences.
So the beer we have today is OG, correct? The original? So to me, there's a very clear, besides the carbonation, there's a different mouthfeel and body a little bit. And there's a little bit of like almost like a tannin-y thing, hop character to the cask one that hasn't fully rounded out. And then on the finish is where I specifically get like kind of like a little bit of a husky, unfinished quality that in the OG is just super smooth and clean and beautiful. Whereas here it's just kind of like still a little grippy, a little husky, I guess, for lack of a better term. Anyone else agree or disagree or think I'm a moron?
I'll take that last part. Just kidding.
No, a couple years ago, I got the opportunity to speak to an ex-brewer from Weihenstephan Brewery in Germany, and he explained it as time is like sandpaper. So you, in your final beer, that this OG that is clear and smooth and crisp and delicious, all those flavors are present in this one. It just sort of gets sanded down over the weeks and ends up in a more finished, kind of smooth, almost if you think of woodworking, kind of same idea. You keep softly sanding it, and it ends up as this nice, well-rounded final version of what it was before.
I get a really nice, almost like an egg souffle, omelette-y character to it. It's there's a tiny bit of sulfur to it, but it's not in the matchstick or rotten egg way. It's in a really nice, like cooked egg kind of way that isn't present in the finished one. And I think it's pleasant. I like it.
I think a cool thing for me about the difference between them, usually when we have carb in beer and like higher carb levels, those typically release a lot more of those hop flavors. So get a little more of the snappiness, a little more of the citrus flavors coming through. But I think it changes this one completely. It's not so much that the carbed one is like an elevated version in terms of aroma and hop profile as the other. They're kind of completely different. The carbed one, I get a little more of a mixed citrus, kind of grapefruity, like grapefruit rind. This one I get, it's the same hop, by the way, too. And this, just because of like that lower carb and because of that not as matured state, it comes more through the traditional noble hop kind of earthiness to it. It gets like more of just kind of a spice too, like a clove, white pepper kind of thing. And then if you drink the other one next to it, it has more of a citrus kind of kick to it. Might be because it's carved a little bit more, so that citrus pops out a little bit better. And where this one is rounded out a little, it lets you get the more gentle tones of the hops that you normally can't get.
That's a great observation.
Sorry, Chris.
No, go, Jude.
My in-laws had bought me a book about how to make bread dough and pizza dough. So I've been doing that a lot more lately. And I think the biggest difference right here is there's more of a sting of, I feel like, carbon dioxide that comes off the younger cask beer than it does in the finished beer. And I think, like when you open the manway on a fermenter, you shouldn't stick your head inside a fermenter because all the CO2 will kill you. But at home when you're dealing with these like 10-quart or 12-quart little like bread tubs or tubs that you put dough in, I always like to take the top off to kind of smell what fermentation smells like, and you kind of get a safe sting of CO2 in your nose. And I think there's a nice sting of carbon dioxide that comes off the young beer compared to the new beer. And then, like Mike said too, the texture is a lot more doughy on the young beer and a lot more kind of powdery, whereas the finished beer is a lot more succinct and lean in its body and expression. It's really cool.
I'm stealing the beer name, Safe Sting.
Yeah, safe to drink. Safe to drink. You're not gonna pass out from smelling your beer here. So another question I have. So we have, is everyone here? Has anyone not brewed? Are we just a lager-centric crowd? Well, has everyone here brewed lager in the past? I know we have two Saison people on the end. We've got Mike from Afterthought giving me the, cut it, don't bring me up. The old, yeah. And then we've got Mike on this side. You've done lagers though before, right?
Not in a long time.
Oh.
And, not very well.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thanks for helping me on this segue. I was
He's
really
being
hoping.
humble. He was a part of Pipeworks Bills. He's being humble.
What's up, Mike?
Well, and I was going to say, so Mike and I are the odd ducks in the panel then. 'Cause we're like the antithesis of lager brewing. It's like not at all controlled and...
Can you talk about why that is? Like what maybe you're trying to evoke from your beers that are specifically not present in these beers?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who makes lagers and does it well is, so much precision and knows exactly what they're doing from a technical standpoint. Whereas, like, we've got no temperature control. The mash temperature doesn't matter whatsoever. It gets super hot, and it doesn't matter. You're carbonating it super, super highly and intentionally leaving yeast in the packaging. And just so much respect for anybody who can make a good lager, because like Mike said, I can't, and it's a very different process.
Well, I think that also we're trying to create as much ester and like phenolic character as possible, and I think these beers are trying to avoid that pretty heavily. So the things that we choose to put pressure on our yeast to do is just a different thing we want them to express than what lager brewing is. I mean, we also, like, the mash temperature doesn't really matter. So we also have other little bugs that help out doing other stuff. But to make a super clean, crisp beer is very different than our beers end up being relatively crisp, but not always that clean.
For the Saison brewers, what proportion of your fridge at home is lager?
It's pretty much all of my fridge except for my beer.
The portion that's not
and
Saison.
There's some Guinness and some West
I think
Coast
that's all
IPA.
brewers. I think our fridges are entirely Coors Light.
But also the grist of your beers, if you fermented them with lager yeast, are pretty similar, no? You guys use Pilsner malt, maybe some wheat, maybe some flaked grains, but your beers look like lager beer before they ferment, no?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Mike was saying about the lack of control is also somewhat a conscious choice, right? In the same way that, like, total control is a conscious choice. It's just the desired outcomes are a little bit different, and the raw materials and the yeast are different. But they're still, like, it seems like we're very laissez-faire and, like, we just put it in there and whatever happens, happens. And that is true to a certain extent. But there's a lot of choices being made to, like, want to let whatever happens versus, like...
And for as much as it diverges along the way, if you're thinking about, like, a lager and a table Saison, ultimately you end up in the same place, which is, like, a really easy drinking beer that you want to just sit outside and enjoy with friends.
And it's something where if you're making blends of Saison, you have a lot more control at the end process, right? So you can afford to have things go one way or another, because at the end you can then rein them back in or tune them up a little bit. But if you put that lager in that tank, like, you can't, at least at a small scale, you're not blending to taste, really. You just want that to go through the whole process and end up exactly where you wanted it. So we have a little bit more control at the end, too. So where you exert your pressure or your control over your beer is different. But we should talk more about lager.
I like this as becoming a Saison lager panel.
Yeah, let me take this mic back.
The last thing, what is great, though, is that what we're talking about is intent. In lager brewing, we're talking about precision, and in Saison brewing, we're talking about kind of like this ephemeral, kind of like artful beauty of letting it go where it's going to go, and kind of letting it, just kind of, it's going to turn out the way it's going to turn out. So I think there's beauty in both, but that's the intent in both.
That's deep.
I would like to dispute one stereotype of lager beer production, and I am not speaking for all lager brewers, and I'd be curious to hear what you guys think, the ones that do make lagers on this panel, but there's a stereotype that lager is all about, like, German precision, like everything's got to be exactly the same, and there's a set formula, there's numbers and data for everything for you to execute a beer consistently every single time. I don't think that that's true, especially on a small scale. I mean, you have guidelines and you want to stay close to them, but every time we make a batch of beer, there is at least one, if not multiple moments in the production of that beer where something behaved a little bit differently, and that's where I think the artist comes in. So just a lot of people say that, Saison brewers are more artists, or Belgian brewers are more artists, and German brewers are scientists. I think finding a good balance between the two leads to a good beer.
So it's funny you say that. So we at Pollyanna, we've probably brewed over 40 different types of lagers over our existence, and we probably have about 6 to 8 every year where we do that meticulous German, like if we're tweaking something, it is small and tiny, and it is impactful, maybe to me, but no one else. But there's purpose there. But then over the years, we've done these experimental ones where we'll just kind of let it go and say, we're going to try this and see what happens. And we usually do that actually for our anniversary every year. So we do an anniversary lager every year, and that one is not meant to be the precision and the super clean beer that we're used to with like something like the OG Helles here. That one is more just like, let's experiment with raising the temp. Let's ferment under pressure. Let's do this with the water. And we're okay with it not turning out perfect because we now know a new lesson with a technique or an ingredient, and that gives us the excuse to experiment with it.
All right. Well, it's the third lagerversary, so I'm curious, Tom. I don't want to take too much of a right turn, but I just wanted to ask you and the panel after that where you think craft lager is and maybe where it's going. And I mean, lager is, I would say, let's say maybe outside of IPA it is, and maybe not even, like what has among the geeks like the most kind of excitement and what seems to have the most head of steam behind it is lager. And I'm curious why you think that is, why that's not just the in the space of the big breweries. I mean, craft beer pretty much started to be not that. Right, so craft beer was almost not lager for a long time, and that's taken a pretty hard shift, which I think is great. I'm just curious if you could talk to where you think, and maybe if you could say why you think lager craft beer is where it is, and why, and where it's headed, and that's open to everybody. Yeah. Go for it.
So I'll start. Well, I think if you look at the price of corn and the availability of it now, I think it says that a lot of brewers are making lager beer because sometimes corn is out of stock and the price has risen significantly. So I think a lot of people are making American-type lagers. I think... Yeah, I saw that.
And you're saying that it's corn is out of stock because...
I am selling some flake maize
because
if you
why?
want.
Can you just explain what...
I think the supply is less than the demand right now. So I think a lot of brewers are starting to make these types of beers because they're hearing their customers want them. So I personally think the craft beer consumer it's the one that's been there for a while is coming back to more easy drinking beer-flavored beer, whereas you're still capturing new consumers in craft beer. But it's easier when you as a brewery are making something more approachable that you can tell them, yeah, this tastes like your macro beer. And I know we've been saying that for years, but everybody knows about craft beer now. So everybody at this point has probably had a chance to experiment with it. And if they haven't, I mean, they're not living around Chicago at least. So I think that the fact that there's more, that's an easier entry into craft beer, it's easier for us as brewers and business owners to present something to those customers and draw them in.
I agree. I think that a lot of the current demand for craft lager is heavily brewer driven. For a long time, brewers were making triple dry hopped, really hoppy, hazy IPAs, and still are. Somebody right next to me does some excellent ones, actually. But they're at the end of the shift, they're drinking lager. I used to work at Lagunitas as a brewer, and I would make Lagunitas IPA and little something something every day. I would make in one shift more beer than we made all last year here at Goldfinger. But the 2 times a year that Lagunitas Pils was available, you couldn't find any of the shift brewers in the cellar, in the brew house. They were all in the filtration department pulling off fresh Lagunitas Pils beers. So brewers have been drinking lager for a while. I think what it took was a few people across the country to have the guts to kind of go against what we were doing before, which was that macro lager is the enemy, and kind of redefining how consumers can enjoy lager and making it cool again. And some people led that charge and had some measured success with it, and I think it's kind of created a wave. But I also think that it wouldn't have been possible if the consumer base wasn't more educated about beer today than they were 10, even 5 years ago. So having that education, then you can have conversations like the ones that we're having today about more subtleties in beer and how to enjoy them.
Is this thing on? So I have a little bit more of a community-centered kind of answer to why the growth of lager is a little bit more of a thing now. Before I started off as a brewer, just kind of a big beer nerd, waiting in lines, like doing the bottle shares for the latest big hype stout, hype sour, whatever it was. But once you kind of burn yourself out of that after a while, when you want to get together with your friends and hang out, you guys get together and want to crush some like really non-pretentious, really approachable beer like a lager. Something that's delicious in its simplicity and isn't oversimplified to the point of like we're at a dive bar drinking like, I don't know, something a little shittier, you know, like Coors Light or something like that. This gives you like a good reason to drink a well-made product that's still delicious and still counts on like every specific ingredient of it to come together, rather than drinking the newest big coconut stout or like the newest big smoothie kind of sour too. Because it's kind of a thing that brings people together. You're able to have something that's delicious and subtle and doesn't take away from conversing with each other and getting together too. You know, the focus isn't always the beer. It's like everybody that's around at the table, and the beer at the table also happens to be really delicious as well. So I think that's kind of what lager does a lot for the beer community too.
I also think that macro breweries kind of vacated the space of flavorful lager. Like at the altar of efficiency and sales, they took anything that was more or less really beer flavored out of them.
They got rid of even Michelob. They're the big all malt lager from Budweiser. They all but killed. I mean, I don't know if that beer even exists anymore.
Right. So there's like documents from Miller of them dropping IBUs year and year over year because every like consumer testing thing was like, we don't want it to be so bitter, and it just ends up being the pap that we have now. And so there's so much space that exists between macro lagers and more intensely hopped IPAs that is now being covered by really good artisan craft brewers.
Yeah, I think too, we're all beer drinkers here, right? And we all come at it in our own ways. And whether that's in high school or in college, we probably came to it, through a Miller brand or a Bud brand or Keystone Light or Natty Light or whatever it was. But right now there's probably somebody getting into Saison. There's probably somebody getting into Imperial Stout. People come at it from IPA and people come at it from lager beer, approaches. So I think, we all go through cycles when it comes to what we enjoy drinking. And I think everyone eventually kind of comes back to this point in their lives where they want to drink a lot and they want to be able to drink throughout the entire night. And that's kind of what lager beer presents to them. But also, Tom brought up a great point. It feels like it's very brewer driven. There's a lot more hops that are coming out. I know like indie hops out of Oregon is coming out with a lot more lager-focused hops like Luminosa and Lorien. Even Strata works really well with it. There's a lot more attention being paid from German hops that kind of have some American applications, but are replacements for traditional Czech or like your Tettnanger or your Mittelfrüh. So I think with it being very brewer-driven now, whether it's wanting to pay homage to the classics, finally being able to branch out or even apply like new ingredients or processes, I think you start to see an emergence in this very like pale, drinkable, even hoppy version of this this beer that's been brewed for so long.
I also think that there's something to be said for the value propositions with beer. I think for a long time, craft brewers may not have seen the value proposition in making a lager, and maybe the customers didn't either, but when a brewery like, I think Goldfinger on your social media does the best job of pointing out where all the value comes from, whether it's experience, history, ingredients, process, all of these things that sort of add up. It creates value for the customer that is more than just surface level. And so when customers are maybe getting a little more frugal, or they're trying to be a little bit more choosy, they drop away the things that don't provide them value. So I think brewers in the last few years especially have done a great job of finding the value in lager for their customers, and showing that it can be more than just the value being how many cans do I get per dollar, and kind of backing that up with how delicious it is too.
Another aspect that I've just kind of tended to notice about craft lager in the U.S., and I think it kind of tracks with craft beer overall, is kind of what it's drawing its inspiration from, and kind of what it's trying to emulate or kind of iterate off of. And for craft beer originally, it was European styles and European products that they're trying to recreate here in the U.S. And then those get iterated off of, and you have the English IPA becomes the American IPA, and the Pale Ale, the bitter, becomes the American Pale Ale. And I think that this has happened exactly with lager as well. I think a lot of times it gets miscategorized as kind of going against the macro American lager, but I haven't talked to any of you about this, or really anybody about this, but it seems to me that you guys are really are much more inspired by the European lagers, not the Budweisers, not the Millers, and not even what they used to be before they started reducing their IBU or whatever, but these classic historical examples of lager, and trying to give people examples of what this beer can taste like fresh, and maybe why it became so popular, and why it kind of took over the world, because lager has taken over the world, and I don't think it's because of Mick Ultra. I don't think that's the flavor profile that people are like, damn, I cannot stop drinking this. I think it was the stuff that you guys are recreating. I don't know. That was just kind of a thesis I came up with while sitting here right now. I'm just curious if...
I think it's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
I think we're at our best whenever we're coming at things from place of intent. It's always better when you can romanticize whatever it is you're doing. So I think that 100% that's true. Being able to reach back into history and bring it back into the present and apply what you know now, and be able to present it to people and tell the story around it. I think we're at our best when all of those things come together. It doesn't matter if it's lager beer, doesn't matter if it's IPA brewing. If those elements are in place, that's what I think when we're at our peak, or when beer is at its peak.
And also, just to note, American macro lager isn't the only industry that is dialing back bitterness, lowering IBU. It's interesting because we're drawing a lot of inspiration from our idea of what German beer or Czech beer or Polish beer, in the case of us, was.
Thank you for the plug.
But I had a really interesting experience about a month ago. I met with a German hops distributor who had just brought a Augustiner Helles bottle, fresh, flew it like in his bag, and we cooled it down and popped it open, and delicious beer still. It was my beer of choice when I was doing the Master Brewers program in Munich. It's the kind of beer like we see Bud Light cans crushed everywhere. You would see Augustiner bottles like on the street everywhere. That's like their Munich's macro, I guess. But one thing that stood out to me was that I remembered it being a little bit hoppier. I remember having a little more bitterness and having a little more hop flavor. And I said this to the hops distributor who sells hops to Augustiner And he said, oh yeah, them and all the big German brewers are also lowering their IBUs. And the explanation I got is that you can sell more beer that way. It's cheaper, and you can sell a lot more if you don't have as much bitterness.
Well, that begs the question then, if you can sell more that way, then why are the people here on the panel not brewing to what Augustiner is trending toward, right? I mean, that begs the question, right?
I think that's relative to what you can sell when it comes to lager beer is the answer.
Well, I think also it starts from I think all of us need to ask ourselves why we got in the business in the first place. And I would say that as a whole, craft beer, when we decide to take the plunge to open a brewery and make craft beer, one of the first things that everybody says is like, so you don't want to make any money. And then it's exacerbated with lager beer, especially because this shit takes so long. But so I think philosophically the approach is different. I think that depending on what your brewery wants to achieve, you do reach that existential point where you're trying to determine, well, can we preserve what got us in this business to begin with? Can we continue to maintain the quality? Can we continue to push what we consider a quality beer, quality ingredients, etc.? Or are we going to now approach our decisions from a business standpoint?
Well, I think no one sitting at this table makes a commodity either, right? So even if Augustiner Helles is better than Budweiser in our subjective opinion, it being strewn about the streets in a bottle that people were drinking and throwing around makes it somewhat of a commodity. And when you make a commodity, you just have to sell more of it. What we make has some sort of emotional attachment or expressive component, because I don't think anyone in this room would be here if they were here to buy a commodity beer. So part of that is ingredient choice, part of it is process, part of it is your branding, but it's all of that stuff kind of rolled into one, that we make things that are a little bit more human than even the best, like Helles from Germany, that's a commodity.
By my calculation, Augustiner's been in business for 690 years, longer than me. So I'm not sure I'm the expert on this subject. But I do think that it can be difficult when you're changing over ownership and management, and if the person who's shining the light where you're headed isn't looking towards the long term, which is very possible that even after 690 years in business, this brewery is not keeping their long term best interest in mind. I think as owners and brewers, I think in every case here on this table, I think all of us try to make our decisions based on the long term, and I think that is, not necessarily following trends, but trying to stay, within trends, but also within our values. And I think things can fluctuate. Maybe tastes do change. But you have to make sure you're still operating within that. And so it'll be interesting to see where lager goes in the next 15 years here, because maybe brewers will tend towards a little bit less bitterness. But the goal is still to stay in business. So it's a tough question. I'm sure many brewers have asked themselves, should this beer, this batch, be as bitter as it was last time? It's an interesting question that I'm not sure any of us knows what we'll think in 5 years.
And at a certain point, as a business owner or as a brewery, you've got to know where you're comfortable with drawing the line. So, IPA, it's probably easier to sell IPA than it is to sell lager beer. One, because it takes a shorter amount of time to make, and two, it hits you over the head with a lot more flavor in a single instance than lager beer probably does. There's probably like more subtlety in like peeling back the layers when it comes to lager beer or appreciating that type of thing. But no matter if you're making lager beer or IPA, at a certain point, there kind of comes a line where you could sell more beer, but when that starts to kind of cross what your intent is or what your meaning or your wants are for your lifestyle or for your brewery, that's where you kind of stop it. So it's I don't know, wherever the rubber hits the road is when you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable where, you're starting to go in places that you didn't want to. I think that's the major difference.
I think kind of another thing to build onto it too is a lot of us kind of have specialties. Tom with lagers, we got these guys with the saisons, me with barrel-aged stouts, Hot Butcher with their IPAs. When you start brewing just because you're like, oh, this style will make me more money, maybe that beer is not going to come out as good as you want it to because now your vision is just on chasing that money. Like the only reason we have our established brands and like our reputations of brewing certain beers is because we started doing this because we like to brew those beers. That's why they're so good now. Like you can't do it just because like you think it's going to make you more money because someone else is probably doing it way better than you, like at a large macro scale that has been doing it for 10,000 years or whatever.
And your ability
how many more
to
years
talk
longer
to
than
it
him?
too, Eric, right? I mean, I think it's important, like our ability to talk to the things and why we do the things is huge. Is whenever we lose that ability to talk to someone and give them the reason why we do what we do, we're done.
Yeah, well, that goes with you guys and your hop profiles. Tom with all the stories of what goes into a lager. Me with the barrel-aged stout blending things. That kind of is a conversation between us and the consumer as well. And that just carries on to make our beers even better and better.
Yeah, I mean, there's breweries that have been open for 10,000 years, and then there's also 10,000 breweries in America. So as soon as you stop making the beers that you actually care about, someone's going to eat your lunch. So, but before we get into the Q&A, what do we think the future of craft lager is looking like? Is it going to continue to be the rocket ship that it has been, Tom? Or how
I want to know what Brian thinks. Brian operates one of the largest craft breweries in the state, and they make a lot of lagers. So what's the future, Brian?
And I'm gonna iterate on that.
It's almost big money.
I'm gonna say also, in addition to that, like a nuance to it is, what kind of outside forces do you think are going to be influencing where craft lager goes in the future?
Well, I think the positives for craft lager are that people are starting to drink less, and they're starting to drink less alcohol in general. I think that is a positive thing for craft lager, because then if you're lowering the alcohol, lowering the calories, at least the view of that, you can kind of justify drinking a little bit more. The challenge is going to be pricing and competition. I mean, shelf space is limited. The more lager that's out there, the more competitions there's going to be. I mean, I was at Jewel Osco the other day, and I saw that strong Mountain Dew next to my beer, and I was like, how the hell am I going to compete with this shit? So it's like,
it's good too.
I mean, that's not craft lager by any means, but I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Craft lager could get to that point where, I mean, now we're competing with ourselves. Shelf space is limited, and if you start putting more lager out there, then you're kind of giving more people that choice that maybe wasn't there before or right now. So I think the future is bright for it, but I think it's important that people like Tom and Jeremy at Goldfinger keep spreading the knowledge and the passion, and kind of leading the way for guys like us who make a lot of lager, but we also do a lot of other stuff. So for us, like, we can't necessarily focus on lager strictly all the time. So it's important for us to have guys like Goldfinger lead the path for us so that we can kind of, ride your coattails, basically. But yeah, I think it is exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I just think that, with any business or trends, there's highs and lows, but I think that it takes the best to really stand out, and I think there's plenty of room for the best to still be out there.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't have a crystal ball, but we're definitely betting on that. At least there's more people who would want to drink Goldfinger lager. we're kind of basing that off of the fact that there is a lot of other craft lager out there that people are drinking, and these people don't know who we are yet. So we're planning a production expansion to be able to meet a little bit more demand and be able to kind of offer our beer more consistently and in areas that we really want to be, but just don't currently have the supply. So check back with me after we fill the new space we took over, and I'll let you know what the future of Goldfinger craft lager is.
Can you tell us more about the new space? I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, right behind our brew house, at the end of our building, there's 3,500 square feet that we just took over. So we're planning to build out our brewery back and make more beer.
How much more volume can you put in there? Huh? How much more OG can you put in there?
Yeah, it's basically just an OG cellar because that's what everybody's drinking. No, we can in that space increase our production up to 7 times what we currently do if we wanted to.
I don't have that much more space in my fridge, but I'm sure other people will buy it too.
All right.
Anyone else have any insights onto where they think craft lager might go?
It's probably only just going to go up. I mean, it's definitely like a grist-driven beer. Like the grains that we put into the beer make up a huge, part of its character. So I feel like brewers have more access across the country and across the world to brew with whatever grains they want to. All different types of Pilsner malts, all Viennas, all Munichs. There's so many different growers and suppliers, so I feel possibilities are endless there. There's more hops coming on board, and then I feel, the more brewers talk to each other across the country and are interested in it, to Tom's point about it being like a very brewer-driven beer style right now, I think everyone's just going to continue to share information with each other and have a desire to make more of it, and when they get together to make Saison or IPA or Stout, they're also going to want to make, a lager beer alongside of it. So I think the more, enthusiasm and information sharing that goes on, I think you're just going to see more and more of it, be released and be made and be drinking. So I think we've only kind of just scratched the surface. It's definitely up and to the right.
I also think that what Jude and a couple of the others have said about intent and value and making what you want to make, if it's just brewers making it because that's what will make them money, that maybe it'll level off because the quality won't be there. But if people do take an interest and talk to each other and really try to put their heart and soul into it and give that value and tell the story of what it is, I think then it's got no ceiling because we've seen it in other parts of the world throughout history. So, yeah.
And to Brian's point earlier, data year over year shows that people are buying less volume of beer but spending more money on beer. So it might seem counterintuitive, but it's probably me and Mike selling $14
We're gonna
bottles
strike it
of
rich, Mike.
5% beer. Anyone else have anything they want to add to the future of lager, or do you want to move into the Q&A?
I think another good way to look at it, too, is like if you go to certain tap rooms or stuff like that, or if you come here to Goldfinger, this place is always popping. There's always people here hanging out, drinking lager, so that just kind of shows there's more growth for it. People clearly like it, and people just want more and more, too. So the fact that this place is booming is a pretty good testament to that, too. If you ever go to, like, what's it called? Kinslager, too, which is, like, in Brewing, kind of in the middle of nowhere. That place is always popping, too, and all they got's lager. And all I know is there's more people here than at my business right now, so I think lager's looking good.
Give yourselves a
Just
hand
kidding,
for
we got
loving
people.
lager. Clap it up for loving lager. All right. You love lager more than clapping. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to walk up. We'll hand you a mic. You'll be on the podcast, and you'll have a question answered. Yeah, let's go, Jack.
Okay. All right, cool. Long time. I see Chris Kenobi here, so I got a question. So we've said a lot, thanks. We said a lot about tradition and lager, and I think in a lot of ways people think tradition is the antithesis of innovation. So two-part question. One, kind of what's the bleeding edge of ingredients or methods for lager brewing? And then 2, kind of a related question, how will lager brewing eventually jump the shark and have their pastry stout moment?
Those are great questions. Well done. Who's going to take it?
Well, I think it's cool to see yeast suppliers like Omega come out with new research all the time on the just the things that they're doing with some of their yeast is incredible. I mean, they have the new Bayern lager that is diacetyl free. So, I mean, it's improvements like that that will, 1, improve quality, but 2, it'll probably speed up our process. And it'll give us the ability to make more in a shorter amount of time. Sorry, Tom. So I think it's just more people being innovative like that. I mean, there's better malt coming out all the time. Like Jude was saying, better hops coming out all the time. But, I mean, it starts with the suppliers, and then it's up to us to kind of execute on it.
I think with the access that we all have to really great ingredients, I don't know that there is a bleeding edge of ingredients that's driving lager. I'll make a controversial statement, but I actually think it's more related to service and presentation than anything. That's where I see the trend going, that people have already agreed to try your craft lager. So what is going to separate yours from another place? And it could just be, whether it's the faucet that you're pouring out of.
Which goes into the second question, which I'll be happy to answer.
The faucet, the story, the glassware, the presentation. I think that's the future of craft lager on a small scale. When you get into distribution, get into trying to sell your beer in grocery stores and beyond, that doesn't resonate like the service model does. But I think what we're seeing in general is the trend is more toward taproom focused experiences versus trying to compete on the shelves now.
What I'm hearing
but I will make a plug that the bleeding edge in process is decoction, baby. Single, double, triple. Haven't seen a quadruple yet, but you heard it here first, guys.
Well, I'm hearing
decoction mashing. It works. It's great. You all drink a single decocted beer, and it tastes much better than the non-decocted beer.
And
that
Tom's
sounds
going
a lot
into
to me like you're trying
Tom's
to build
going into the second
more
part of the
culture.
question now, which is the pastry moment. He's going to decoct it so much that it's
So
going to be syrup.
that is my answer to the pastry hype, is quintuple decocted Pilsner.
With coconut and Strata and Zythos.
See, I'm going to go in the other direction, and I'm going to say this almost as a bit of a warning, because where I see the lager lager jumping the shark, and I mean this as craft lager, specialty lager, not just like lager overall. Nothing's going to jump the shark with lager anytime soon. But I think if it gets too precious, too like, if decoction is good, triple decoction, if getting this type of malt is good, then like we're going to do even the most minute crop of this malt for no real reason. And I think people are going to start realizing that there's the brewery. What's the guy who does the Screaming Eagle brewery? But what's the name of the brewery? Hanabi. Now he's like, I think, getting close to that, but his beers are amazing. And this is a guy who makes Screaming Eagle wine, which is some of the, probably the most coveted wine in Napa. And he does this very bespoke lager, and he sells it for like $90 a 4-pack or something like that, right? And people buy it. And I think it's like, he's one example, but there were single examples that spawned a million imitators. You have the hill farmsteads, and then you have everyone who's trying to have a farmstead brewery, and you have, and it's, I think that's where I see lager potentially jumping the shark, is trying to be like, we're going to be like so authentic that we're going to be like, 9th century techniques, man, and it's going to cost us $150 for a 6-pack, and those are, like, obviously I'm joking, but I'd see that's where I would see lager potentially jumping the shark, with being too precious and faux authentic.
Yeah, $30 4-packs. I think the undercurrent, or the kind of like what's always been associated with lager beer, it's like an everyday person's beer. So there's always got to kind of be that element. You've got to be able to cover your costs, and there's no reason, there's been some podcasts that say, why does a lager cost as much? And I feel it's unfair to think that an IPA is more valuable.
Pay no attention to that.
Nice move. There's no reason why an IPA should be more valuable than a lager beer, but I think there's always got to be an element that it's like an everyday type of beer. So it probably jumps the shark when it's $40 a 4-pack, and it's double dry hopped.
And hopefully it doesn't get to that point. You're not going to see Whiskey Hill bottling a lager, $40 with the wax on it, unless people buy it.
Exactly.
We
Any
did
other
put
questions?
a lager with a Magnum bottle and wax on it, but we charge $15 for it. Magnum bottle, that's a great
The bottle
deal,
probably
right?
cost $5.
It was also brewed with a very expensive New Zealand hop.
Any other questions that anyone has out there? Come on up. Yeah, I got 2 more questions. Yeah, you got to come on up.
Bill Connolly.
Very interesting, you guys. Thanks for this. Step mashing versus decoction. I guess maybe by a show of hands, if you're willing, who does step mashing for their lagers or versus decoction? Yeah, I know you do. I know you do. You told me how you do it, and it works great, by the way. I do not decoct, but maybe some commentary on, what your thoughts on either.
Take it, Tom.
Saison brewer. I'll take that question.
Single mash at 148 will probably do fine.
Yeah, I'm
Just
glad
kidding.
you asked the question, because if the mash regimen wasn't important to us, we wouldn't have put it on our menus from day one. That was a significant part of what Goldfinger beer is. Not all of our beers are decocted, so I'll go down the list of our core beers. Our original is a single decoction. Our Pils is a step mash. Our Vienna is a double decoction. And our Mexican lager has recently graduated to being a cereal mash. There's reasons why we do that. I think if you have the capability to do a decoction, so just to explain what a decoction is really quickly, during the mashing processes, which is the part where you're extracting all the sugar from the malted barley by steeping it in water, there are a ton of different enzymes already present inside the barley, and doing a single infusion mash is the process where you basically find the sweet spot where you could activate a group of enzymes that you want to, but you are missing all sorts of other enzymes on the spectrum. You can still make great beer that way. In fact, that's the British way. Most British beers do not do a step mash, nor do they do a decoction. If you have the capability to do a step mash, though, or even a decoction, I always liken it to the difference between having an automatic transmission car and a manual car. You can still get from point A to point B, but the question is, how are you going to get there, and what's the experience going to be like on that journey? And for us, we wanted to be able to control every single enzyme with time and temperature to get exactly what we wanted in the finished product. So in the example of a decoction like the Vienna, that's more on our, that's one of the beers that we kind of characterized as being more malty, even though all our beers I consider malty. That one has more of like a classic kind of toasted malt character. So employing a decoction mash, I actually pull off a portion of that and I boil it. And that helps explode the little sugar packets that are inside of each kernel of barley and create a little bit more complexity in the flavor, but also contribute to the body of the beer. So I am of the philosophy, it's not the only way to do it, but I am of the philosophy that if you have the tools and you have the know-how to activate enzymes to achieve what you're going after, even if it takes more time, why not?
Great. Any more questions? We got time for one last question.
Okay, so in the days and age of hops, when I think of lagers, I typically think of tradition or traditional recipes, especially Goldfinger. But we do hear a lot about hoppy lagers and IPLs and all these things like this. And there's so many hops coming to market and a lot of ways to experiment with them. How do you see lagers when it comes to experimenting with different hops and things like that, as opposed to just focusing on your malts and sticking to tradition?
I think there's a place for it. Just as brewers, we know that lagers, although difficult and time-consuming to brew, they're a good representation of your skill and your patience and everything you thought of just to make it for what it is. So a lot of the time when people do the hoppier lagers, I think lagers act as like the perfect vessel for translating the actual flavors of those hops, because there's not a whole lot of other things to hide it. There's not like super complex hop scheduling during the boil. There's not like crazy adjuncts like for a stout. There's not perceived acidity for wild ales or anything like that. So maybe if you want to switch it up a little and keep lagers a little interesting and trendy to try the latest hop, they actually might be one of the best beer styles you can use to kind of isolate those particular hop flavors of the most unique experimental crop or whatever it is. So there's a place for it.
I think we've seen with Goldfinger's their rotating hop series with some of the hops that may not be like, in Craft Beer and Brewing magazine as the most popular new hop, HBC, whatever it might be, which are super interesting to us brewers. But I think they've done a good job, and some other breweries have done great jobs of kind of showcasing the hops while not taking the focus off of the base beer itself. So I think if you put the intent into putting the recipes together and the marketing side of it together in one big package to show off, hey, we're doing this thing that you have not experienced before, that we have not experienced before. I think that's a great way, all under the umbrella of the tradition and quality of the underlying processes, to get that goal, to completion.
I think you can make the case that, hops from like the Tettnang region or the Hallertau region or the Spalter region or, even like Czech Sots, those are the first great hops. I think you could make a case why those hops are better than Citra and Mosaic and Simcoe. And a lot of the the more popular American hops were bred from mothers and fathers that came from all over the world. So, and I also think that, hop character is a major part of certain types of lager beers, especially like Pilsner. I think if you go ahead and you drink Pilsner, and I think Goldfinger does a great job of incorporating hop character across all their beers, and I think they've got a menu that kind of puts that on display, that you could drink through, all the kind of ranges of flavors and ABVs, but kind of go up from a more dominant malt character to things becoming more bitter and more hop flavorful. One of the coolest things I think for us as Hop Butcher is the same way, we spent 8 years playing with Citra and Mosaic, and then finally when we have the means to brew 15-barrel batches of lager beer and, use hops like Tradition and Liberty and all the other ones that I mentioned before, and finally apply the same way that we think about Citra and Sabro and Nelson Sauvin to all these hops we ever read about, or we finally get to exercise these new muscles, and then we have made more beers that are slightly more. The lagers that we make do focus on hop character a lot more and lean more hoppy than they do malt, but I think it just opens up a whole new type of playbook to introduce a balance of hop character versus malt and yeast character. And while you respect the classics, also be able to offer something that's kind of like left or right of what that center is. But I think hoppy lagers are a big part of the future of what's happening in lager brewing.
I completely agree, and I also think that there's an opportunity to make traditional hops sexy too, because one of the best combinations, especially in lager beer, is actually combining some of the traditional hops, like a Saaz, with maybe an offspring of Saaz grown in New Zealand. So you have those kind of buzz-worthy New World hops who have lineage that you can trace back to Czechia or Germany, and if you have that conversation, then you can actually encourage people to also appreciate the traditional ones. So I see a big future in hoppy lager.
And what Tom's saying is Rawaka and Motueka, two really big IPA hops. Those are all daughters of Czech Saaz. So that's so cool to combine those two hops together. And there's a difference too if you're hopping at a half a pound per barrel, a pound per barrel, a pound and a half per barrel, whether you're dry hopping lagers at all. There's different ways to express hop character, and there's ways to go very far, and there's ways to be more lighter handed and more balanced. But Tom brings up a great point. There's a lot of the things that we're talking about from a modern standpoint have ties to history and tradition, and there's a way to bring that history and tradition to the forefront.
One other thing I would say is to caution on jumping to conclusions about things. I know there's a joke that people make about IPAs that like this week it's Citra and Mosaic, next week it's Mosaic and Citra. But the same thing I always say could be said about this week it's Pilsner and Vienna, and next week it's Vienna and Pilsner. I think if it's brewed with intent and it's there's effort put into the actual pairings of different things, I would say if it's founded around quality, to give it a try to parse out the things. As brewers we nerd out on this stuff, and I'm sure as a home brewer, that all the home brewers who are here do as well. Try to find those little things, and it's a good way to find not only joy but also kind of the value in what you're drinking.
Very interesting to think of if there will ever be a hype lager hop that actually like sells units, putting it on the label, and that IPAs might try to do, but it won't quite work, and it's just this is a lager hop and it's a hype one. It's very interesting. I think it's time to let people just enjoy themselves and drink beer. But before we do that, I wanted to thank everyone for coming out. Thank you so much. Thanks to Tom at Goldfinger for having us. And thanks to all the panelists. And Tom, is there anything you would like to say before we get out of here? And to the rest of the panelists, if you want to hop on to that, if there's anything you want to say before we leave, now's the time.
I'll speak last if anybody wants to talk about their breweries and anything they got going on. Or
Mike, you don't want to have any. You don't want to say anything. You're such a blabbermouth.
I would recommend if you guys stick around, get in a conversation with the two Mike Saison brewers and ask them what the future of Saison is. But plan to be here for a while. Nobody has anything to say? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Go ahead. You start it.
All right, thanks for having us, Tom. Whenever you're done with lager, come to Whiskey Hill, drink barrel-aged stouts because we're making barrel-aged lager next. That's all I got.
Well, if nobody else has anything to say, I just want to thank, first of all of our guests who came out to listen to us act like we know what we're talking about. Hopefully you gleaned something out of this, but if not, hopefully at least you enjoyed the beer. I believe there's still beer in that cask, so don't be shy. Have some more of that. I think some of these guys are going to be sticking around, so I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you guys offline about anything you want. I wanted to thank Chris and the Fade Master. You didn't even plug. The quiet guy at the end who makes this all happen.
He's
Serge,
local.
the Phase Master. And Mike Shalau was also co-host of the Beer Temple podcast. Super cool to have you guys out here and administer this discussion. But also thanks to all the panelists for coming on a Tuesday at 5 p.m. to make a fool of yourself tapping a cask. We will continue this going forward, so I guess we should see you guys, if we don't see you at any of the other Lagerversary events, we'll see you at the next First Tuesday cask tapping.
Got it. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right.
This is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, it's seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, it's seen from again.